everybody. Great to see such a full room of enthusiasts and people interested in DePIN. So we came to probably one of the most exciting topics about investment into this sector. And DePIN is not just a mere buzzword anymore. It's a key sector of the future of this technology. And it's projected to grow by 2028 to $3.5 trillion. The size of this industry, according to the DePIN development report by UWeb and GDI, and as well, already to the date, we have VC funds invested over $1.99 billion into this sector, and as for the last year alone, this size was of more than $578 million. So today we'll discuss why this industry is attractive for financing, and as well what challenges and risks arise along with that. And as well, we see the interest not only from the investor side, but as well from the big enterprise players too, like for example, Deutsche Telekom and Lufthansa as well launched the nodes on of big blockchain, so that's pretty interesting. And let's discuss with our discussion. The first question is, why do you think that DePIN is attractive for investment and for financing? And let's start with Solene. Oh, actually, let's introduce briefly as well our speakers. First, and where they invest, what their focus is.
Sure. Hi, I'm Solene with Borderless Capital. Borderless is one of the very active Web3 investors, one of the pioneers in DePIN. We started in 2021. We have 40 plus investment in DePIN right now. The reason we started in DePIN is because we're a strong interest of our managing partner, who was one of the two people on the board of Helium, which is one of the pioneers company in the DePIN space. And we had someone who was head of investment at Telefonica, one of the big telecom in Europe, who joined to lead all the investments at Borderless on the DePIN side, because he saw the huge potential that this could have in revolutionizing industries like telecom. So here, Borderless, we invest across different sectors, but mostly infrastructure driven. So not only DePIN, but we have companies like Securitize, etc. And we have about 250 portfolio companies now, HQ in Miami, but global firm in general. So.
Thank you, Jaou.
So my name is Jaou. I'm with Huma Finance. Huma Finance is a leader in what we call the PayFi sector, so PayFi for payment financing. And what we believe at Huma is that when more of the global GDP is going to come on chain, there is a whole set of new financial primitives, or I would say financial products, that would need to exist. The way the traditional finance sector was built was for an economy that was mostly in the real world, where people interacted and paid for things physically. And a lot of the economy, or the global GDP, I'd say, went online in the past 20 years. And more of that is now going to come on chain with, we know, machines and AI coming on chain and needing to interact and transact. And so what kind of financial sector do we need to build to service that new form of economic activity? And so we are one of the pioneers in, on top of building a payment layer to have interactions and transactions between machines and humans on chain, building financial services, including credit, to service the same machines and people on chain. So we're passionate about this, and we've started investing in DePIN financing in 2024, and we are going to accelerate in 2025.
Thank you, Calvin.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. This is Calvin from Spartan. Yeah, we're a fund based out of Hong Kong and Singapore. We've been around since 2017, currently running 3 funds, a DeFi-focused fund, a gaming fund, as well as a liquid long-short fundamental hedge fund. Glad to see many DePIN enthusiasts here. Happy to talk more about the topic today.
Thank you. And my name is Anna Tutova. I'm co-founder and CEO of Coinstelegram. It's a media group. We have a news website as well, PR marketing agency. And we support the projects in the space, getting them promoted in top media like Forbes, CoinDesk, Bloomberg, and so on. As well, promote them via KOLs, influencers, and growing communities. And additionally, we produce the documentary films about Web3 and blockchain adoption. Recently, we released a new documentary film featuring Vitalik Buterin, creator of Ethereum, Paul Ardoino, CEO Teza, Arthur Hayes, co-founder of BitMEX, and many others. You can check it out on our YouTube channel called White Crypto. And let's continue with our discussion. So the first question, what are the key factors do you consider while assessing whether to invest into this or that DePIN project, and how do team as well tokenomics and business model show the investment potential of the project? Let's start with Solene.
Yeah, so DePIN has obviously a lot of commonality with the other companies and startup analysis, you know, looking at the founder's background, market size, you know, the team, have they worked together before, all kind of like the basics of analyzing a company. This doesn't change, but the main difference is, you know, the manufacturing part of things and the supply chain. And when it comes to actually manufacturing, you have to be really good at hardware and all the supply chain component, as well as being a Web3 kind of sometimes like really plugged in the community, because you have to be good at the token listing, managing the market makers and all that side of things as well. So, but the most important really is the demand, like how much demand does this type of companies have? So for example, for us, I just mentioned one of the interesting investment that we made last year, company called GeoNet that gained quite a bit of traction. What they do is geolocation data. So a lot of the time the geolocation is a little bit off a couple meters just because of weather reasons, etc. But for certain industries, it requires way more precise accuracy, like a better accuracy. So if you think about construction or self-driving, defense, there's a lot of different applications. And so there's no real good solution. There's a couple players in the Web2 space, but GeoNet really created a company where now you can buy those little devices, you can participate in the network, and they created the largest real-time kinematic network for geolocation data. They're already making 2.5 million plus in revenue per year, and they already had customers. So they really use Web3 to actually accelerate their growth, make like the cost lower of the production and just like the expansion in general. So those are the types of companies where there is actual demand for the data already, and they're just creating and using Web3 to actually expand faster and at a lower cost. So instead of, I think a lot of the criticism of Web3 is like, oh, we're a solution looking for a problem. So we're really looking at what kind of you know, problems are being solved through Web3.
Yeah, that's a great way of bridging Web 2 and Web 3, and we see more companies with revenues. Calvin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I personally think that DePIN actually makes a lot of sense with crypto, right? It's a prime example of bootstrapping a network using a token. Obviously, from this, obviously, you'll get rewarded in proportion to what you contribute and how much you contribute. I think the synergy with crypto makes a lot of sense here. That being said, I think there are certain DePINs that is slightly more attractive than the others. Obviously, DePIN is very wide, right? There's physical, non-physical, ranging from anything from energy to compute, right? So depending on what projects are, which vertical the project is in, yeah, essentially the idea is it makes a lot of sense. I think GeoNet is a great example. A lot of people have been wondering, hey, like, where is the demand side is actually going to come from? Demand is actually not as small as we all expected. A lot of these DePIN projects are actually doing 6 to even 7-digit ARRs. Now, whether the valuation then makes sense is then for us to evaluate, but the demand is there, right? And speaking of demand, I want to quickly touch on some other example that also makes a lot of sense. Like, I think being niche within a certain category, for example, Vana's Data DAO, right? I think it's a good example. Curating a certain type of resource then rewarding that is actually, it makes a lot more sense than doing generalized DePIN. I think Geonet is one. We recently made an investment into Wingbits as well. They are doing flight tracking info, right? A lot of people don't even know, like, you know, current data, they're actually coming from 1 or 2 parties only. So we want to, like, you know, decentralize this and crowdsource these data from more people, right? Another one we did was called Puffpaw, right? A lot of people are just saying, hey, why fund a vaping company? But behind that, right, there's like viable resources, right? There's health info, there's smoking habits. How much do you smoke? How do I incentivize you to stop smoking, right? Instead, do this vaping thing instead, right? So there's a lot of ways to play around this, but my point is, just to drive everything back, is that DePIN makes a lot of sense with crypto, and it's actually good to, you know, be niche within a certain resource that you're looking to crowdsource from the public.
Thank you. Jaou, can you comment more on the side of credit financing? How do you evaluate the projects?
Yes, I'll add a little bit there and talk about something that's maybe a different spin on why DePINs are great for investing. So I think you both were talking about the equity side of things or the VC perspective. And us at Huma, we try to look at it as well from a credit perspective. And the reason is that for a lot of infrastructure projects in the, I would say, traditional world, which are centralized, they rarely finance themselves only with equity. Actually, the equity financing of an infrastructure is often a slim part of the overall project financing, and a lot of it is debt. And so the question becomes, the CapEx needs for any infrastructure project is still there, it's still very high. How do you finance this with debt as well? How do you complement it with debt? And so that's the question we're asking. So when you're thinking about providing debt to a project, the questions are somewhat similar to an equity investment, but because the risk you take are different, you're going to look at things maybe a little bit differently as well. So we think a lot about sustainability of projects. So of course, like DePINs, most of them are very, I would say, early. It's a new sector, and a lot of the projects don't have a ton of maturity yet. But we try to select projects that have more maturity and that start to have, I would say, patterns in their cash flows, where we can start to see, have an expectation of, can they repay the debt? So that means, because we're talking about networks, on the supply side, do you have an economic model that's sustainable? Do you have profitability for the participants in the network? When they bring in an asset into the network, can they make money off of it? Therefore, they can pay you back. And after they've paid you back, hopefully they've made money themselves. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. And then on the other side of the network, the demand side, are there enough customers? I think we were talking about demand before. Are there enough customers? And is the pricing model for the service such that people who pay for the service continue to come back and feel excited and satisfied about the service they're getting, and they feel like it's priced the right way? So I'd say for us, sustainability, and I would say healthy and repeatable economic models, both on the demand side and on the supply side, is what we look at.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you touched the question about the risks and the risks of repaying by the projects. So I would like to discuss this in more depth, and what risks do you navigate when investing into DePIN, and what concerns arise regarding adoption, liquidity, cybersecurity risks, and as well regulatory uncertainties. What are your thoughts, Solene?
Yeah, on the DePIN side, once again, I think the manufacturing and supply chain aspect of things is definitely one of the key ones. We've seen some companies, I'm not going to name names, but that were not able to necessarily ship all the devices that they were actually had been ordered and paid for. And this is, you know, it's acceptable to a certain extent in terms of like the time frame. And so, depending, like thinking and having a good thinking around like where should the manufacturing be made and having the right partners is really important. And so we've seen a lot of really good successes as well. Once again, GeoNet is doing a great job. There's a lot of DePIN companies doing a great job. Helium is expanding There's more than 30,000 hotspots, I believe, in the US and Mexico, etc. So, but it's not easy. Like anything hardware that touches hardware is really, really not easy. So that's one, I would say. Second one is to go back to your question around the prices and etc. I think this year all the meme hype has kind of taken all the liquidity from all the different other categories. So DePIN had a good last year, and then the end of the year in 2025 were really kind of all the attention was taken by AI. So now that this has slowed down a little bit, we're excited to see some of the DePIN project getting tractions again from the price perspective. Also, I would say this is where one of the expectation is quite high because there is revenue. So a lot of the people are expecting, kind of looking at some of the P/E ratio that you could have in actual listed companies on NASDAQ, etc. So there is you can have more references to value a DePIN company rather than a layer one that's still kind of subjective sometimes. And then regulatory risk definitely is always on the mind. We still don't have a super strong framework. There was some news around Nova Labs, which is helium, in discussion on some of the regulatory side of things and the securities, etc. Now in the US, we're very positive around what's going to happen this year. The government is very crypto friendly, so we should be in a good, they should be quite positive. So I would say those three ones: the manufacturing side of things, where is the liquidity going, and how can we make sure that there is more attention going to those DePIN tokens beyond the hype, and three, the regulatory side of things.
Yeah, with the market is challenging now. Jaou, do you have anything more to add to that?
I agree entirely with what Solene said. I also think that generally for me, the overarching risk is that these projects are generally pretty early. We don't have as much distance, so there isn't as much maturity. And when we look at projects often, there's a certain amount of mistakes that just early experiments are going to make that have nothing to do with just any bad intent that just exist in a lot of these projects. But we start to see some that are emerging. I think we mentioned GeoNet, Helium before. There are some that are emerging with more and more maturity, but I'd say the lack of maturity in the overall sector, I think, is a key risk factor. One thing that I would like to actually add to this, which is maybe on the flip side, as we have more and more, I would say, maturity in these projects, there are new opportunities to manage risk in a better way with DePIN. And that's actually one thing that we at Huma are very passionate about. So when I think about my early days investing in infrastructure at the World Bank, when banks provide loans to develop infrastructure, they do a lot of work upfront to analyze the project. They will model the cash flows and make a number of assumptions, and then they decide whether or not they provide that financing. After they've provided the financing, they kind of have to pray that they get repaid. There is not very much you can do except maybe, actively understanding some of the risks and trying to manage them, but basically most of your control is before making the decision to invest. When you invest in DePINs, what we're experimenting with now is you're investing in a project where the economic activity is happening on chain, which means the cash flow is on chain, and so therefore the money is programmable, and you can direct the flow of fund with smart contracts. So there are a number of, I would say, levels of security enforcement you can have that a bank could absolutely never have. So some of the things we've experimented, we work with a project called Rome, which is one of the larger telco projects. And we've launched a POC whereby we are financing participants in the network who want to buy equipment. But then their tokens, for example, are held in a vault, and that is a form of collateral for the loan. If they don't repay the loan, it's a form of staking. We can think of it as staking. If they don't repay the loan, then that's a form of security. And the difference is when typically you give out a loan for a normal infrastructure in the traditional world, the infrastructure itself, let's say the bridge, is your collateral, but I cannot sell one piece of the bridge to get the money back. So it's not necessarily liquid. But here I can have tokens, they're liquid, you don't pay me, I sell these tokens, I get my money back. So that's a very interesting one. A second mechanism that is very unique to DePINs is if I give you money, for example, to pay for a piece of equipment, when you receive the money from your customer, the money can be programmed to come back and pay me first before you even perceive it. So that means I don't need to trust that when you receive the money, you're going to pay me back. I'm directly at the source, getting the money from the origination of the cash flow, which is the customer. That's called counterparty risk. That counterparty risk in normal traditional system is very expensive, and it increases the cost of capital. So these things, I would say, these two mechanisms as an example, are things that are actually opportunities to manage risk differently and are quite innovative and were never possible before we had economic activity on-chain with programmable money. So I think that's on the flip side, like lower risk, I would say, insights for financing DePINs.
Yeah, that's quite interesting observation, and we see the benefits of Web3 for that. And I would like to add that as well, the majority of funding to the project goes to the seed funding. So yeah, you can predict a lot of other risks. Calvin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think both of you touch on very, very good points. I think DePIN in general is a relatively early space, and of course there are inherent risks that goes along with that. And obviously you have supply chain side, there are like risks around production, how much it costs to produce, where it's produced, a setup costs and stuff. There are a lot of margins you have to think about. Geographical, I also think it's a risk. I think some projects do pick certain regions to go to market with, and it turns out that, hey, like that region doesn't really have that sort of data, right? Or it doesn't require that, right? Then, yeah, it's something that we have to think about when looking at DePIN projects as well. I think one more thing that I would add is the quality of data moving forward, right? Not necessarily data, but everything in DePIN. What end users provide into this network, the quality of it, just given the sheer amount of participants in the market. And this actually goes back to my previous question, which is it's important to provide high quality data. Otherwise, like the data is not high quality, it's not going to be used, people are not going to buy it, right? So it's actually a good thing that there's certain sectors within DePIN that actually has higher demand, right, for certain sort of resources, right? And data obviously would be one of them. And within data, you can actually, separate into like different things. Health, could be flight, could be anything, right? So yeah, that's something to think about when looking at DePIN projects, yeah, I would say. And some of the risks that we do take into consideration when assessing different projects.
Thank you. And as well, what are the biggest risks when coming to the mass adoption of DePIN, and how do investors can help to overcome those? And other market education, some constraints with hardware or network effects are the challenge today. What do you think, Solene?
One of them is always so in terms of the different risk when it comes to actually going to the broader mass adoption. I would say the first one is always liquidity, and now we're going to have a lot of different DePIN tokens, and last year DePIN started to take a lot of to kind of go through its kind of hype, and so everybody was labeling themselves like a DePIN project. Not everything is DePIN. That's a longer conversation, but we're going to see more and more. I think to date, there were about, from the Messari report, Messari always does a really great report on DePIN every year and every quarter, actually. I would definitely recommend for you guys to read it. There's about 350 DePIN projects. So now it's like, how does the liquidity flow between the different tokens? Whether you take credit and you like that between the different exchanges, it's very expensive to list a token on exchanges. So some company decides to just go through DeFi first, and then it becomes a real problem. Like, how do you deal with the different liquidity of the different tokens? Like, how do companies also enable payments? So usually the tokens, one of the application is, okay, if you want to use my service, you're going to need the token to pay for the service. That's a pretty kind of straightforward, and there is obviously like governance and a lot of different things that the token might be used for. But usually we've seen some UX issues with that. It's like, who wants to sit on a bunch of potentially volatile token to pay for a service, especially when it comes to Web2 customers who might not be degenerate. So there's been great solution to be able to pay in stable coins. And so kind of everything is abstracted and they can just have a pay with a credit card, etc. I do think that we still have a lot of progress to be done on the UX side of things. So liquidity, UX, and those, I would say, would be the main ones. There's progress being done. It's just like a lot of collaboration also that needs to be done between the DePIN project. For example, at Borderless, we have an initiative called Grid, where we kind of put together a lot of various DePIN projects under one umbrella, creating one token to work with a lot of them. I'm not going to go into the details, but yeah, I think more collaboration between all the DePIN projects, which we're already seeing. I see some great people in the room, like Marari, who is also a portfolio company. And so I think those are all being addressed, but it's just like, and we're going to discover more problems and to solve with time. But I think if this has become, because we're having mass adoption, this is great. I would say talking to a lot of Web2 kind of big customers, we're seeing a lot of telecoms, etc., that being very open. They also invested in different companies. So in the US, Helium is partnered with T-Mobile. Telefonica is an LP in Borderless, for example. They really, and the reason is because they want to really understand all the progresses that are being done in the telecom space. So they're getting involved, but in terms of using DePIN as, say, like their main solution for their service, we're definitely not there yet. The technology needs to prove itself a little bit more. So I would say the problem is not necessarily specific to DePIN, it's just the whole crypto ecosystem that we need more robust technology in general, which we're working towards. We need better UX, which we're working towards, and we need better liquidity that flows cross-chain. And yes, I would say mostly that.
Yeah, thank you. We unfortunately come to the end of our panel. If Jaou or Calvin, you have to add anything very briefly, you're welcome.
Maybe very briefly, to your last question, I would say as well, I think that before DePINs become ubiquitous and kind of like take over service provision, let's say in telco or other kinds of infrastructure services, I think we need to have consistent quality of service. And I think that, especially, for example, when we talk about critical infrastructure such as telecom, the kinds of things that it enables can be actually really, really critical for an economy, and you cannot afford to not have good quality service. So if you think of a hospital that relies on a like 5G network to perform IoT connected surgeries, you cannot have a service and a network that kind of like cannot ensure quality of service. So I think the first thing we will need is to make sure that we have standards and that these standards are shared across and we have new norms. And as we have that, I think more and more adoption will happen. So I think for me, it starts with the high quality supply. And once we have high quality supply, more demand will come.
Calvin, do you want to add anything?
Not much to add, to be honest. I think you guys pretty much touch on the points that.
Okay, thank you for interesting discussion and for your insights.
Thank you, Anna.